Ohio's public libraries see a cut in their funding? That's a real possibility. In the Ohio House's proposed version of the state budget, which is already passed, there's a change that's made to how libraries get their money. 1.7% of the general revenue fund is allocated toward public libraries. But the Ohio House got rid of that and instead made it a line item, which the Ohio Library Council argues makes it easier to cut library funding. And now the state Senate is currently working on its version of the state budget, which is going to likely be voted on later this week. And still, in the state Senate's budget proposal, that 1.7% that's allocated for libraries is not included. I spoke to Jason Kucsma, Executive Director of the Toledo-Lucas County Public Library, to get some perspective on what this change would mean for library systems. What are the big concerns of the Toledo-Lucas County Public Library in terms of library spending?
Just to give some full context here, Ohio is really unique in the sense, and I like to say that we're the gold standard for public libraries in the country. And part of that dates back to, 100-year-old partnership that libraries have had with the legislature and state funding for public libraries. And, it's something that we, have been advocating. It doesn't happen accidentally. It's through a long process of maintaining those relationships with our elected officials. And so, at the beginning of this year, we were really optimistic that the governor's version of his budget came out with the public library fund set at 1.75%, which means that 1.75% of the general revenue fund then gets distributed to 251 library systems across the state. Pretty optimistic about that. And then the House version came in with a lower amount and set that as a line item instead of a percentage, which makes it a little bit more precarious, makes it more likely to be eliminated from future budgets. As opposed to the percentage that's written into law. So, we're continue to advocate for the allocation that the governor set in his budget, which was around $530 million for the first biennium, or for the first year. And that would, again, 251 public library systems relying on that funding. And so we're continuing to advocate. I do believe the Senate version is going to mirror the House version that they're voting on Thursday. So, that's kind of where we are right now, continue to advocate behind the scenes with our elected officials.
What would be the challenges if you saw less funding from the state of Ohio? Because obviously we, on the local level, we pass library levies and support them. But then, of course, you have this other bucket that you can pull from. What would be the challenges in seeing less state funding?
You're right. So we did just last November, voters here in Lucas County approved a $153 million bond issue for us to do work across the entire county on all of our locations. So there's kind of this little cognitive dissonance where on one hand, we've got local voters approving an investment in a resource and institution that they believe in, that they use, that they benefit from. And on the other hand is the public library fund, which helps with our operating budget, makes up about 40% of our operating budget. And honestly, the public library fund has not kept up with inflation, and so we saw some loss in revenue last year across the state that really kind of put us at the same level of 20 years ago. So as we see in our households where our costs keep rising, and the revenue has not been really able to keep up with that. So the big issue, we're trying to plan for all the scenarios. And hopeful that that the budget will come out as we continue to advocate for that governor's proposal in his budget. It remains to be seen what will come of this, and so we're really continuing to have those conversations. The thing that we benefit from here in Lucas County is that we have really strong relationships with our elected officials, and they're in and out of the public library all the time. They're having their meetings, they're meeting with constituents, they're meeting with us, they're seeing the kind of vibrant activity that happens in the public library. And that's not the case necessarily across the state. There are elected officials who haven't set foot in their library in years. And these are the folks who are making decisions about funding. And in all honesty, it does feel like it's a solution in search of a problem. I mean, this has been a strong relationship with the state for a very long time, and tinkering with this model really doesn't feel like it's necessary or beneficial at this point in time. We're talking about library funding, which really only makes up less than 0.5% of the entire state operating budget. So we're talking about what is in effect a rounding error, and we're kind of would love to see libraries kept whole and be able to continue to grow. And there's a reason, there's a reason we are the gold standard for public libraries in the country, and want to keep it that way.
I know you all are considering a lot of different hypotheticals of what could happen as a result of the vote on Thursday. But if there is the case that you see less money from the state, what would be the things that would have to go first if that's what we can expect to happen?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. It's everything from our collection budget to hours to staff. I mean, these are all the things that we're really looking at and thinking about. Hope we don't find ourselves in that situation. We know that we see, several million people a year darken the door of the public library. Our meeting rooms are used all the time. This is you've heard it before, but the library is just not a place for books, and that is 100% true. Literacy is our brand. It's our bread and butter, but at the same time, we're a place where community members are coming to meet other community partners that we work with to get to receive services, whether it's health professionals providing health screenings at the library, people getting legal help at the library through our justice bus, different types of. We spent a lot of time over the last handful of years really making sure that our partners are leveraging this paid for public infrastructure, 20 locations across the county, using that infrastructure to engage people where they are. And it's been really beneficial. And so, a cut to the budget or a hit to the budget would have an impact that kind of reaches across the system.
Let's say the library system would have to go to voters to maybe fill in a gap in state funding. Would you see it as being a challenge to ask voters for more money, or would you say that voters would be willing to do that and provide more?
Well, it's interesting. There is some legislation that is being considered that would increase the threshold that voters would have to pass a local property tax levy to 60%, which, you go look back to our November election, we passed with 59%, which I thought was a strong showing in support of us, but it wouldn't have passed in that situation. So it's an interesting dichotomy here because on one hand, um, there's a lot of conversation around the state around increased property taxes and people having this sort of property tax fatigue. But when you eliminate funding at the state level, then the only place you can go is to look to local folks for support. And we're very fortunate that we have a tremendous amount of support here in Lucas County. But we also try to be thoughtful about what we're asking for. And we want to be thoughtful about people's bottom line. And so we're due to come back in 2027 to renew our operating levy. We do that every 5 years to come back and show our work to the community, to show them what we've been doing with how we've been sound fiscal stewards of those public resources. If we see a decrease in funding or challenges or issues like that, then we may have to come back a year early. We would love to be able to come back with just a renewal of our levy, but if we see a drop in revenue, then we might have to look at increase to the local millage, and that's obviously not something that we really want to do, even though we do have tremendous amount of support from the community here.
I do imagine, based on the messaging that you've had out for the last few weeks, that it will continue to be for folks who care a lot about the library system to reach out to their elected officials.
Oh, that's always a good idea. I mean, being civically engaged, I think, is really important. It's something that we talk about quite a bit here. Is being active participants in this democracy. I think public library is, as we talk about information and access to information, it is the cornerstone of a sound democracy, a thriving democracy. And so, encouraging people to be in touch with their elected officials is certainly something that we always encourage people to do, whether it's about local potholes or statewide funding for libraries or school funding. It's always a good idea to be engaged.
What would be your message then for lawmakers in Columbus who may not be completely sold on the idea of continuing to fund libraries through the percentage rather than as a line item in the budget?
Well, I do think, again, this is a solution in search of a problem. This is not something that really needs to be fixed. Libraries have been operating in good faith across the state, as sound fiscal stewards of these public dollars. And frankly, we return over, I think, an average of $5 in services for every dollar that's invested in libraries, whether that's at the state level or local property taxes. And so, our message to them is, the governor had it right. He had set the public library fund at 1.75%. If we're not going to be a percentage, at least give us that allocation so that we can continue to do the good work we do for our community. There are plenty of other places around the country where they have to drop everything. Libraries have to drop everything to advocate for their funding at the city level or at the county level. I love the fact that Ohio is not in that same situation, but we find ourselves in that right now. And so our hope is that you can find ourselves on the right side of the final budget that's passed at the end of this month, and continue to do the good work that our staff does day in and day out for the community.
In anticipation of changes, if there were to be these significant changes then to the funding, how soon would folks see changes to the services that the library offers?
We're trying to be thoughtful about that. It's a really good question. So if the budget would take effect July 1st, so as our costs increase, that's a big question mark for us and for anybody across the country as we look at the impact on tariffs and the impact of other catalysts on our revenue and the cost of goods. It remains to be seen, but we would hope that what we're trying to do is keep our community informed, and so even recent communication to our cardholders, let them know, like, here are the things we're paying attention to. We try to be transparent and communicative about all of the developments at the library, and so should we have to make any big changes, we would do that with plenty of advanced notice to the community, and our hope is that we don't find ourselves in that situation. We do good work, and we want to continue doing that good work.